Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just one more minute. All right, let's kick it off. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name's Ariel, and I lead B2B marketing here at Foursquare, the leading location technology platform. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague Elizabeth Hein, Foursquare's Chief Data Protection Officer, as well as Julian, the Director of Product Privacy at Roku, to talk about how to preserve data privacy in partnerships. So we will kick it off. I'm excited to have a great discussion today, and I think both of these individuals have a ton of amazing expertise and interesting perspectives to share. Please be sure to drop any questions that you have throughout our conversation in the chat. And also be sure to check out, we have a few different resources available as handouts that you can reference as well. So with that, I will kick it off. First, Elizabeth, Julian, can you perhaps introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and what led you to working in privacy? I'll start with Liz on this one.
Thanks, Ariel. Thrilled to be here. As Ariel said, I'm Liz Hein, and I joined Foursquare about a year and a half ago. Prior to this, I was responsible for both global trade and privacy at HP. I was the legal counsel for the entire company for both issues for a number of years. And before that, I was a partner in Washington, D.C. office law firm doing global trade at the time. I started privacy when I joined HP. I was actually recruited to be their global trade lawyer. And then at the time of the two companies separated into HP and Hewlett Packard Enterprise, they told me, well, you're probably gonna have to pick up privacy too. And so this was 2015, and I thought, well, I can do global trade. How hard can privacy be? And I've been living privacy pretty much 24/7 ever since. So I was there for the development, or through the development of the program for GDPR compliance, CCPA, all around the world. And now joining Foursquare, we're really working to embed our existing privacy practices within our engineering teams and our product teams, and really making it privacy woven into the fabric of our company.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Excited to dive more into that. Julian, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into privacy?
Yeah, sure. I think I have sort of a more non-traditional privacy background, maybe, but I don't even know if there is a traditional background these days because it's such a new field. But I have a general engineering background and been working in product management for the last 10 years or so. And then one of my that wasn't necessarily focused on privacy. So I have been in a number of different roles focused on smaller companies, bigger companies, consumer, B2B, so like across the board. But in one of my previous roles, I was focused at some point basically on internationalization and had a lot of exposure to privacy and compliance topics. And this was sort of similar time frame. It was maybe a little bit later, 2018, so or just before, I would say 2017, 2018. So just when GDPR was around the corner, and so there were a lot of questions obviously around it. And in fact, what I learned when I signed up sort of for to internationalize the product when I was at LiveRamp at the time was that internationalization really equaled almost 80-90%, privacy questions, right? And so how do you deal with privacy in an international context? And so when this role came around about 2 years ago at Roku, sort of like running and starting and building out a privacy team from a product perspective, I thought it was a very interesting opportunity, and then sort of jumped aboard and started building the team. And so that's how I got here. So it's been interesting and great journey so far.
Awesome. So I love that you both bring different perspectives, one from sort of the product and engineering side and one from the legal side. And I know that sometimes within organizations, there can be a disconnect between those two different teams. So how do you think about bridging that gap within your organization?
Julian, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I guess it's interesting because I sit sort of like, what my team is running basically, right? So we're running privacy product for Roku overall. And in some ways, like, we're sort of sitting right in the middle of the problem, I would say, which means, so my team owns products that we're building with privacy implications. And so in some ways, like, we have to consider like a holistic view from a customer perspective, but obviously also, business and privacy considerations and legal considerations, and build them into the products that we're building. But we're also, as part of our role and function, we're helping other product teams within Roku to basically make sure that we build products from a privacy, included perspective, basically, and include that view from the get-go. And so in some ways, like, sit between other product teams and the legal teams. And so I think we always get a front row seat. And in some ways, we're trying to bring it together in some ways, right? So like there's sometimes like the legal view or like a compliance focused view, and then there's sometimes like very much like, oh, here's what I need to get done to get my feature built. And so what we're trying to do is like bring these all together and try to figure out what makes most sense to build, and how do we especially like not only focus on compliance, but how do we make sure that it's consistent, right? So in some ways, like a default mode always that I think like you run into a lot of times is like that you build something in a compliant way, but it's different like 4 out of like 5 times when you're building it, right? And so trying to get it sort of holistic, trying to make it consistent is really something that my team is pushing for, and kind of really take a broader lens around it, and not just focus on compliance, right? Because there's very much also user topics when it comes to privacy. It's not just a compliance and legal question.
Right. And so what I would say to this, I'm coming at this from the legal side, and then I also have the operations piece here at Foursquare. Just to tie things together, we're talking about privacy and partnerships, but I think it's really important to understand that it doesn't just start at the partnership. You want to be with companies that are baking in privacy from product design. And so that's what Julie and I are kind of talking about right now. And with legal and product and engineering, I've seen this a number of times in my global trade practice, in my privacy practice. You get the lawyers who come in with a long questionnaire. You don't understand why you're filling it out. You got to type in the words. You don't know what the policy says. They're talking at you. It doesn't translate. And so when I came to Foursquare, I spent a lot of time really working with the engineers and the products. And instead of trying to get them to fit into my mold of compliance or building out products and embedding privacy, I have really challenged myself and my team to shift to the way they think. So we actually sit in with a lot of our engineering teams on their monthly meetings, their product roadmaps, OKRs. My team uses Jira, which I don't know if I've ever seen a legal team use Jira before. I'm convinced I'm probably going to break it at some point, but I'm using Jira to really make the lives of the engineers and the product folks easier. And so I've shifted towards that to really help them, not get in their way, to be a partner in the development of new products. It keeps them on schedule. You kind of try to avoid surprises. Surprises always happen. The other piece I would say too is when you have the executive support, the tone at the top, that helps a lot too, but it's not enough. So you have to have that tone at the top, but you also have to have that grassroots support. So even though I'm reaching out to the engineers, I still have expectations that the engineers are going to be thinking about privacy and how they can make the product more privacy friendly. We're going to be talking to product about issues like that. So we're trying to bring a top-down, bottoms-up approach to privacy here, with my team shifting a little bit out of our traditional legal mold to work more like engineers and product managers in their role.
I think it's actually interesting, right? Because I think to your point on making it easy for other product people and for engineers to interact, and I think that's actually one of the things that we found as well. Like, I think it's impossible to have both. Basically make sure people understand what is generally needed and what is sort of some general frameworks and principles behind it. But then also when it comes to the point of like doing the reviews, to your point, like you're in Jira, right? You're making it very easy because that's already the tool they're working with. And so you can go in there and basically help them. I think it's in some ways like removing the barrier and removing sort of the scariness, maybe sometimes like, oh, I have to talk to someone now, within the legal teams or on the privacy team. I don't even know. There's so much complexity. And if you can bring those barriers down, I think is very, very helpful. And we've seen this to basically just make that process much smoother and remove maybe some of that scariness, when it comes to some of those, conversations, because they're just sometimes very complicated, right? And so I think that's what has worked for us pretty well,
And frankly, just being in the room, having those conversations, attending the OKR meetings, attending the strategic planning. My team may not understand everything, but they're hearing it, and you hear it repeatedly, and it starts to make sense, and you can start to see how the whole strategy of the product is forming and where there might be privacy touch points. And so we're there having those conversations. And so I would say relationships and collaboration, in addition to leveraging existing tools, have really helped us.
Let's dive a little bit into the partnerships element of things. I know that that's sort of the topic at hand. And so at your companies, you're both tasked with building different new products that are addressing consumer needs, but an important part of that is forming partnerships with other organizations. And how do you think about balancing the sharing of data with partners to deliver business results while also protecting consumer privacy? I know you touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to dig in there more.
Yeah, I can kick off on this one. So like I said, we are thinking about privacy from our very initial thoughts about products, how we're going to develop them. And I often challenge the engineers about what kind of privacy protecting features can we bake in there. We're having discussions about pseudonymization, differential privacy. Can we add noise to kind of blur some of the results? On the legal side, what kind of contractual protections can I put in place to make sure our partners won't re-identify data? But then I think when it actually gets to the partnership, we want to be doing business with partners who value privacy like we do. So it's not just the privacy statement. It's not just we are GDPR compliant or whatever compliant. It's looking at their tone at the top. Where does privacy fall within their organization? Oftentimes it's calls, maybe Julian's team and my team are on the phone and we're talking about different ideas to help make the product even safer or the partnership even safer. I want to see that there's dedicated resources with our partners, because if they have access to our data, I want to know that they understand the privacy laws and the rules, and they've got controls in place to make sure that that data is protected. I love having discussions like this. I love to see that external engagement with partners. So it's really, it's partnerships like with Roku and talking with Julian. These are the kinds of things I love, because it's just really interesting. We're talking about really hot topics in privacy and challenging each other and looking ahead at the developments in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for me, I would probably structure it in like three elements, right? One is sort of like has to start with trust, to your point, Liz, right? Around, it's hard to work with a partner that you don't generally trust, right? Because if there's any kind of like data relationship that's happening, it needs to be based on trust. And I think that's really like the starting point for it. I think the second point internally is really for the teams that are involved in it around partnerships to make sure that they fully grasp basically like, excuse me, like the scope around data privacy, right? What are the questions to ask? What are the areas that are sensitive? I think it's like that understanding that's really important. So when you go out and have those discussions, like they have a sense of like what's possible, right? Like what could we actually do? What can we do from a compliance or legal perspective, and what are we as a company overall are comfortable doing, both from a privacy and from a business perspective? And then I think the third one, that's probably like the most exciting one from a product perspective, is like how can we from a product perspective help facilitate data partnerships basically, and do it in a privacy safe way, right? And so I think the last couple of years have really shown us that there's tremendous effort been made in things like clean rooms, and help basically in some ways like create a win-win, right? Between sort of like on the one hand, like how can we have data and use it for partnerships, but can do so in a privacy safe way. And so on the one hand, really protecting consumer privacy, but also ensuring that we can drive and enable even new value. And so I think that's the part that's really exciting to me personally.
Yeah, you mentioned clean rooms, Julian, and I'd love to dig into that further because I know that Foursquare has actually partnered with Roku on a clean room that you launched to enable advertisers, and Foursquare helps with the measurement side of that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that clean room for advertisers and how that project came to life?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really interesting. If you go back, a couple of years, like in the traditional TV world, like there was never, like in the linear TV world, right? There was never a notion of being able to like measure on a very like detailed, accurate level, kind of like what your impact has been. And so, and then you cross that sort of with the digital world, like the web world, the mobile world, where very much since the early days of sort of like the ad tech ecosystem, you've been able to like measure the impact, right? And so it was very clear that we needed to have a solution for us as a company to bring these things together and kind of like bring a very similar level of insight to our sort of like TV streaming world. And so what we started out thinking is sort of how can we do that in a way where we can drive value for partners, but at the same time still preserve privacy for consumers. And so the buzzword obviously is clean room, and I'm sure a lot of folks have heard and worked on this or have seen some announcement by various companies. But what our approach really is, like, how can we set up a mechanism for us that allows us to make data that we have internally, this could be like impression level data, right, from a campaign or certain data assets that we have as a company. How can we make that innate or available in a way that can drive business cases with a partner, with an advertiser, without actually sharing data, right? And so it means from a compliance perspective, that data never leaves Roku's walls, right? We're also never exposing individual level consumer data, right? So like no individual is ever, exposed through that. It's really all protected through the mechanism, through the clean room that we've built. And so for us, really this project is as much about preserving privacy as it is really around, enabling and driving more value for the partner and for our client ecosystem. And I think we have maybe a slightly different bend on that than maybe some other folks, but really what we're focused, as much as we're focused on the privacy preserving aspects of it, is really how can we drive value and how can we add more value to the ecosystem. And I think that's what's exciting about it too, is that the fact that there is a very robust technology now available and you can build great products around it allows you to potentially even make more data assets available than you were able to do so in the past, because as a company, you wouldn't feel comfortable sharing those, both from a privacy and from a business perspective, because you couldn't properly protect the data, right? Because sharing in the past always meant, here's the file, and then you have to trust that the other party doesn't do anything that you don't want them to do with it. And so now you have a way to basically gate that. And I think that's what's really, really exciting about this, not just like, I think, what we're building, but I think the clean room ecosystem in general. And I'm very, very excited to see where sort of the world, is going to bring clean rooms, in the next couple of years.
And it's not just about the clean rooms either. There's other parts of it as well. So, I was thinking about this. There's one person at Foursquare who's responsible for deliveries to Roku. That's one person with potential access. Those type of controls are important as well. So the clean room itself isn't going to get you there. You also have to be thinking about who has access to those clean rooms, who is driving the calculations, who's aggregating the results, and those are good discussions to be having.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think obviously, like once we go into the nuances, right? It's like it is something like you need to build it in a way that's privacy preserving. You also, and I think that's one of the hard part is like, or one of the hard parts is like, how do you make it privacy preserving, but still make sure there's a lot of value and utility in it, right? And so in some ways there is a little, and I think that's the big challenge with the clean room still today, is how do you build it in such a way that you get both value and also preserve privacy? And I think, and do that in a way that like requires not a ton of work every single time when you engage in like any kind of new data sharing use case around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what has the response been like from marketers thus far with the clean room?
I mean, we've actually seen very, very positive responses so far. We have I think we made this public like earlier this year when we went into a closed beta. So we have a handful of folks basically working with us today. You guys are one of them. Foursquare is one of our measurement partners on this. And so everyone, I think, when we ask our advertisers and our partners on this, their response is like, oh, wow, I didn't think it was going to be that easy. So in some ways, there's a little bit of this effect of, we know this is new technology, this is a new product that's going to be a little bit rough around the edges, and I think it's certainly the case in some areas, but very much people are like very happy how good it works and how easy it is to use, given the overall complexity of the product.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It has to be easy for the customers to use, and it also has to be easy for the partners to integrate with as well. So I know that we've been really excited to partner with you on this, and it's really important that we both as partners have the right privacy protections in place to make it successful. I know that something that we think about a lot at Foursquare is, the data, handling data is a privilege, and it's incredibly important because the location data that we're handling is quite sensitive. And so, Liz, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about how we handle that type of sensitive data and our approach there.
Yeah, so just to close the loop on the clean room, the data that we provide helps Roku and advertisers understand whether someone who saw the advertisement actually visited the store. So it kind of closes that loop. We have long had in place, and this is a hot topic right now, we've long had in place a restricted places policy. And so under that policy, we filtered out locations, points of interest that we felt were too sensitive to be included in our downstream products that could be attached to an individual. Recently, we have worked with the Network Advertising Initiative. It was probably late 2021 and certainly in the first half of 2022. We worked with them to develop what's called enhanced standards on sensitive locations. And we've basically publicly committed now that we will maintain an inventory of sensitive locations, and we will also filter those out, just as we had been doing of our downstream products that can be tied to individuals. And so what is a restricted place? There is no definition, obviously, right now, and in absence of any federal legislation or regulation by the FTC, we're kind of on our own to figure it out. Certainly after the Supreme Court decision, we heard a lot about abortion clinics and medical facilities, but also religious locations. Just looking at my notes here, correctional facilities, military bases. There's a laundry list of things that we are looking for when we review the types of locations that we think should be sensitive, marked as sensitive. So that data comes out. It never makes it to our attribution product. It never makes it to the product that's used to conduct the measurement downstream. So we have taken out those sensitive locations so that our partners like Roku don't even have to deal with that, because it's too sensitive. We want to respect people's rights. We have no business in that, and we want to make sure that we respect their rights. I think it's worth saying again, we want to respect people's privacy rights.
Absolutely. So you mentioned how Foursquare does provide some data into the platform in order to fuel attribution. So I'm not sure if perhaps one of you could elaborate a little bit on the partnership and sort of how advertisers are using Foursquare and Roku together.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can maybe just give a quick overview. So obviously, to maybe like explain this a little bit more, right? Like how does the clean room work typically for advertisers, right? Which I think is maybe good to like outline what it means. So in some ways, we as Roku make data available in sort of like a privacy safe part of the clean room, and so does the advertiser. So it's really about the clean room is about bringing data assets together, and so it's like bringing our data assets together, bringing advertiser assets together. And then, and potentially even like bringing like location data, for example, like Foursquare location data in there, and kind of using all those data assets together, again, in a privacy safe way, overlap them and sort of drive analysis, drive insights from that, right? Or it could also be in some like a broader measurement, kind of engagement where, someone like a measurement partner goes in and basically helps with the analysis itself, right? So I think those are all different ways kind of to drive value. But I think the important part for us is like when we think about sort of what's the impact or what's the value that advertisers are getting out of the clean room, and I think this is very similar for every clean room and the way it's structured. But at least for us, there's really 3 priorities. So typically you can start with planning, so you can bring data in to do planning for your campaigns. And understand sort of how does your data that you have and your audience overlap with, let's say, the Roku audience. So those are like various planning use cases. And then you can actually go immediately from there to activation, right? So you can say, okay, great. Now I know which audience I want to target. I want to run a campaign, and basically from that analysis in the clean room, you can activate it and run it within our OneView platform. And then once you run it, you can get the results and the measurement out of it. And so that again goes back into the clean room. And so you can bring additional data assets in there if you want to measure it. And so this could be also where, you may want to bring in location data, for example, to kind of see, oh, how did a certain campaign impact, let's say, certain, attributes or certain offline pieces that you're trying to measure. And so it really is a cycle that you're starting, right? Coming from planning to activation to measurement, and really is a tool that helps you to improve the value of your advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited to help fuel that type of data-driven approach to marketing. And I love that you mentioned it's sort of a virtuous cycle, right? Where the learnings from the measurement can then fuel the planning, and it all works together really nicely. So we're super excited about the partnership, and we'll be happy to talk to any marketers about how they can work with all of us together. I think we only have a few more minutes left, so I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. Please feel free to drop them into the chat, the questions, and we can have Julian and Liz respond. So I'll give everyone just a moment to reach out with any questions that you have about the partnership, about clean rooms, about privacy. I know, let's see, I think we might have one question from before, which touched on, I think, something that Liz alluded to, which is around privacy regulations and laws. And I know that things are rapidly changing there. And so how should marketers be thinking about the new laws or the possibility of decentralization versus federal privacy law? We'd love your thoughts there.
So I think decentralization is the way we are headed right now in the US. There is some federal privacy legislation pending. It is unlikely to go anywhere, although it has gotten further than any other legislation on privacy has in the past. Starting January, we're going to see CPRA in California come into effect. Then you have Virginia and Colorado as well. After that, Connecticut, Utah. I think we're going to continue seeing this trickle effect with states enacting laws. Now, fortunately for us, our program is really built off of a GDPR framework. And Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, Utah tend to be a little bit more like GDPR than California. California is its own unique law. And so we're really focused on what gaps we might have in place to seal up before those go into effect. And with California, the big thing to think about there is the sale of data or sharing data for purposes of behavioral advertising and marketing. This is not new, at least the sale part, but it may extend into activities that may not have been considered a sale before. I think we're also going to see more enforcement. We've seen a pretty big case come out of California targeting cookies and talking about those being a sale, even just the analytics cookies being a sale of data. I think we're going to see that. They're going to enforce. They're also going to cooperate with Colorado and Virginia and the other AGs. They are all talking as they implement the laws. So that's something to be aware of. Lots of discussion right now that could impact advertisers with global privacy controls. So placement of cookies, do you have to honor the opt-out set through a browser? And so there's a lot of things going on with that and preparing. So we can continue to expect change. What makes it difficult as well is that even when the law goes into effect in California, we still don't have regulations. So we'll have to wait for the law to go into effect before we actually know what we have to do to comply with the law. It's not going to get easier, but it means that you have to be diligent and have to continue monitoring and be prepared to shift direction.
Yeah, I would completely second that. It feels to me a little bit, kind of listen to what you mentioned, right? Like the sort of like the speed or like the velocity that we have in terms of, especially for the US, like national laws and now like enforcement activity happening over the last couple of months, that it feels like 23 will really become sort of like the year of privacy in the US in some ways, where a lot of the things that we've been discussing in theory and we've sort of been looking at and trying to like prepare for may actually now really fall into place, basically, right? And so with all these different state laws coming into effect, with CPRA coming into effect next year, and so I think there's a lot of and global privacy control as well, right? So there's a lot of sort of activity, and I think every company is sort of trying to figure out how can we be ready and how can we prep for that, right? And at the same time also trying to make sense. And I think this is when I take in sort of my product hat here. What's hard, of course, is like how do you bring all these different requirements for all these different states together, and how do you bring it into something that is consistent and works, and do so in a way that's compliant, that makes sense for users, that's intuitive, and also doesn't have a ton of complexity on the back end, right? And so those are all like big challenges. And so I think everyone is kind of looking at this and trying to figure out how can we make sense of this, and how do we solve this in the best possible way.
And to add on to that, Julian, I think it's interesting, and I often find parallels between my global trade practice and privacy. They seem totally different, but global trade is a more mature compliance area, and for a long time there have been laws limiting what kind of technology can be controlled or can be exported from the United States. Putting laws and regulations around technology and things that move so fast is impossible, and privacy is the same way. Technology, innovation, they outpace any law and regulation. So we're in a time period right now where there is no clear direction. We're really trying to fly the plane as we're building the compliance program at the same time. And then, well, I was actually going to call this headwinds anyway, so this makes sense. We've also got headwinds with like the FTC. They've got a rulemaking process going on right now, and they have a very strong view on the role of marketers and data brokers and data collection and use. And so those are just our everyday as we're in privacy and in the digital advertising space and marketing.
Yeah, I agreed. Fully agreed.
We did get one question that I think you've spoken to a bit, but it's sort of, what are your thoughts about the future of privacy and ad tech more broadly? Anything else you would add to what you've already mentioned?
I have some general thoughts. I think if we think about privacy and ad tech, there's obviously a lot of impact to ad tech. I mean, I think there's no way to debate that, right? That has already happened in the last couple of years. If you think about the demise of third-party cookies, right, is hugely, influenced by privacy regulation and sort of like general trends in the industry. I think that this will continue to move forward, right? So I don't think there's any way back from it, or there's anywhere where it's going to stop. I think the trend is very clear, the direction is very clear, and so I think what it means now for the ad tech world more broadly is like, well, how can we get in front of it, and how can we make sense of it? And I think one of the things that I'm personally excited about is, and this goes back to, I guess, clean room, or more broadly privacy enhancing technologies, is that I do think there is one thing that's maybe previously undervalued. There seems to be a bit of a win-win actually, where we can preserve consumer privacy, but we can also solve for certain ad tech cases actually better than before, right? So in some ways, by like overhauling the frameworks through privacy enhancing technologies, there's an opportunity to make existing infrastructure better. And when I say better, it means like we can make it more privacy safe, we can make it more accurate, we can reduce things like fraud, right? And so in some ways, like the view that I take is like, how do we use this moment that's very pivotal for the industry, and look forward and kind of see how can we actually like improve this across all these different dimensions, and basically in the end up with something that again is better, in all regards, or at least in most regards, and kind of like use that as a way to spur innovation, rather than trying to like just comply with like the requirements that are being given to us, and like look at it in a very like sort of short-term manner rather than a long-term manner. And so I think that's what I'm actually pretty excited about this like state of the industry right now.
I think it's interesting too, Julian, that it hasn't been regulatory changes or enforcement, particularly in the US and in the EU, different story, that has had an impact on ad tech. It's coming from certain large players in the market. I think it's interesting too. I listened to the FTC had a maybe 5-hour hearing where they listened to different panelists and also members of the public on their opinions and views on the impact of they call it commercial surveillance, but ad tech and also algorithms on individuals. What impact does that have? And I think there's also a big disconnect too, that you often hear advertising funds the internet. You won't get it for free if you don't have advertising. It's still not translating. It's still not, people don't look at the advertising. They look at it in a negative light. And so as I was listening to brands talk about their first party relationships and how important they are, I think it's really critical that the value of these, what we're bringing to customers, what the brands bring to customers by doing this, I think needs to be made more apparent. And it's not just, to fund the internet. That's not working. I think it needs to be very clear. I don't have a great answer for that, but that was something that struck me as I was listening.
I think that's actually a really great point, and I completely agree on the communication piece too. I think we as an industry need to do a better job to kind of like advocate for it. And you're right, it can't just be like the funding piece. I think it's an important one, and it's great to talk about funding and small businesses and diversity, but it needs to go along with like, okay, we're doing this, but we also, here's how we're protecting consumer privacy, right? And so I think these things need to be like basically talked with together rather than at odds. And I think that's probably going to help us, right? Like kind of get a better understanding also for, from regulators, like what is it that we're really doing, and maybe remove some of that scariness, like when we around like terms like, surveillance or, commercial surveillance or surveillance advertising. I think the other thing is also, I do think that there's slowly a realization from a regulatory perspective, and I'm curious what your point on this is, Liz, is that sort of two big kind of work streams, if you want, right, around like, anti-competitive behavior and privacy, that they're sort of, increasingly at odds effectively, right? So it's actually hard to get it both ways. If you're sort of like saying, well, you're enabling, or you want to make sure it's like maximum anti-competitive, that may mean that like the data can't flow as freely, which means, you're actually running sort of like privacy and anti-competitive at odds. And so I think that's another thing that maybe folks are sort of starting to understand, that this is something that needs to be much more holistically solved for, right? And so you need to find some balance between those two, I guess.
100% agree. I think the EU is maybe a couple of clicks ahead of us in terms of enforcement. I'm aware of a number of cases that kind of blurring the lines, and I believe the European Court of Justice came out and said that the anti-competition regulators can kind of get into GDPR enforcement somewhat. There is a tension there, and I know we're going to see it in the US as well from FTC. Yeah, I'll just end it there. Thinking through my next comment, I'll pause right there.
We have a question going back to the clean room about, I know Julian said that people can bring in data, the brand can bring in data, the publisher can bring in data. Do you have any examples of sort of what type of data a brand might bring in versus a publisher? They asked if it was via an email match. So could you maybe talk through that a little bit more?
Absolutely, yeah. And so we have some one-sheeters, I think, that explain this a little bit better. So I think
yeah,
you can go back to
definitely
that too.
check that out.
So that's just a reference. But yeah, very simply speaking, from an advertiser perspective, right? So what data can you bring in? So it's your first-party data, right? And so this could be like an audience that you have. This could be your CRM in terms of like people that you want to target or retarget. But it could also, like if you're thinking about sort of the planning use case and then going into activation, but it could also be kind of like offline, sales data, for example, that you're bringing in. So I guess to answer that question, the type of data is like up to the use case that you're trying to drive, and obviously like the fact that you have access and you have the rights and you own the data. And in terms of like what type of identifiers and how does the matching work? So so one thing to maybe call out is like that there is no, you don't have to bring a certain ID or anything in there. We support a number of different ways to bring data in. Primarily emails is a great way to bring in, and we're working on other ways to basically supplement that. But say if you have a file today that has emails, that's a great starting point, to bring that data in and to match it against our system. But in general, like I guess the call out is it's not constrained to a specific identifier or type. Like there's multiple ways how you could bring it in and basically match it. And if you have, if you have something and you're not sure if it works or not, you can definitely talk to us and we can figure out how to make it work.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good call out to reference the 2-sheet. I suppose we could take one final question, which is around contextual targeting. I know that that's something that Foursquare also offers. I'm not sure how you would talk about that as well, Julian.
Contextual targeting in the sense of maybe just a like.
Yeah, I mean, I know that on the Foursquare side, we offer what we call proximity, where we enable advertisers to reach individuals based on where they are in real time, based on that real-time context. And so that's a little bit different than perhaps data about historical behavior. So that's sort of how we, I think, would approach contextual targeting, but I'm not sure if that question was for us or for Roku.
Okay. Got it. I mean, I think just from a Roku perspective, yeah, obviously, the reason I was asking was contextual is like has a very broad range of like how that's being understood. But in the context of in the context of bringing in other data assets, I think is what it means, right? It's like how can you advertise or how can you personalize if you want in the sense of like not only using historical data but using other data assets, for example, like location data or anything similar to that, or proximity. That's definitely something that we also support, right? So I think from our perspective, again, when it comes to the clean room and like, can you do it or run a certain use case? Ultimately, it really depends what data, any data that you can have and bring on a certain identifier that we can match is something that we support. So it's not necessarily that it's only historical behavior that needs to be sort of like looked at or brought in with other data assets.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think we are just about out of time, but any final thoughts from the two of you about privacy and partnerships? No?
Julian?
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your expertise. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to the audience for your thoughtful questions, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.